Imagine you did everything right. You studied hard. You took the job seriously. You made the sacrifices that needed to be made. And then one day you looked at your pay stub and saw it. 6 figures. $100,000 a year. The number you had been quietly working toward for years. The number that was supposed to mean something. The number that was supposed to finally make the anxiety stop. And for a moment, it did. For a moment, it felt exactly like you imagined it would. But then the months passed, and something strange happened. The checking account still ran thinner than it should. The savings grew, but slowly, slower than the number on your income seemed to promise. The financial breathing room you were certain would arrive with that salary never quite materialized the way you expected. And you found yourself asking a question you never anticipated asking at this point in your life. Why doesn't this feel like enough? That question is not a personal failure. It is not evidence of poor discipline or financial irresponsibility. It is, in fact, one of the most economically significant questions of our time, and the answer to it reveals something about the modern financial landscape that most people are never clearly shown. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why $100,000 no longer buys what it used to, which specific forces cause that shift, what the mathematics actually looks like when you run the numbers honestly, and, most importantly, what threshold actually represents today what $100,000 represented a generation ago. The answer to that last question is going to be higher than you expect, and understanding it changes the way you make every significant financial decision going forward. But to understand where we are, you have to understand where we came from, and that means going back to a number that is rarely discussed in conversations about modern personal finance. In 1990, the median household income in the United States was approximately $30,000 a year. A person earning $50,000 at that time was comfortably above the median, solidly in the professional class, and largely insulated from financial precarity. A person earning $100,000 in 1990 was genuinely wealthy by the standards of that era. They were in roughly the top 5% of earners nationally, and their income gave them access to housing, healthcare, education, and savings in ways that felt stable and generative, rather than strained and uncertain. That is the world in which the mythology of 6 figures was born, and that mythology has been running on borrowed time ever since. Here is where the mathematics gets interesting, and where most people's intuitions fail them. If you take $50,000 from 1990 and adjust it for cumulative inflation using the standard consumer price index through 2024, you arrive at approximately $115,000. Not 100,000. 115,000. Which means that before we even begin discussing why 100,000 feels insufficient, the raw inflation math already tells us that it is, in purely numerical terms, worth less than the $50,000 income of a generation ago. The number went up. The purchasing power did not keep pace. And that gap, invisible to anyone who thinks in nominal terms rather than real terms, is the foundation of everything that follows. But here's the part that most inflation conversations miss entirely, and this is where the story gets considerably more complicated. The Consumer Price Index is an average. It blends together the price changes of hundreds of goods and services, groceries, electronics, clothing, fuel, and produces a single number meant to represent the overall cost of living. And within that average, some categories have risen slowly, and some have risen so dramatically that they have effectively rewritten the financial reality of entire demographic groups. Electronics, for instance, have gotten dramatically cheaper in real terms over the past 30 years. A television that cost $2,000 in 1990 now costs a fraction of that for a vastly superior product. But electronics are not where household financial pressure comes from. The pressure comes from 3 specific categories: housing, healthcare, and education. And in each of those 3 categories, the price increases have been so far above the average rate of inflation that comparing them to the CPI almost understates the severity of the shift. Housing first, because it is the most visceral and the most universally felt. The median home price in the United States in 1990 was approximately $79,000. By 2024, the national median had crossed $350,000, an increase of more than 340% over a period in which general inflation rose by roughly 115%. That divergence is not a rounding error. It is a structural transformation of what homeownership costs relative to income, and it has happened fastest in precisely the metropolitan areas where professional employment is most concentrated. A person earning $100,000 in San Francisco, New York, Austin, or Seattle is not a homeowner by default. They are a renter calculating whether ownership is even mathematically achievable within a reasonable timeline, or a buyer who has stretched their debt-to-income ratio to a degree that leaves them genuinely vulnerable to any disruption in income or unexpected expense. And here is the question worth sitting with for a moment. If housing costs have risen 3 times faster than general inflation over 30 years, and wages for most professional workers have risen roughly in line with general inflation, what has actually happened to the standard of living that a given income can sustain? The answer is that it has contracted, quietly, incrementally, in ways that are easy to miss year over year, but stark when you look at the full arc. The person earning $100,000 today is not living the life that a person earning $100,000 in 2000 lived. They are living something measurably narrower, even if their income number looks identical on paper. Healthcare compounds this picture in ways that are harder to see because the costs are often partially obscured within employer benefit structures. The average annual healthcare cost per person in the United States has risen from roughly $1,000 in 1990 to over $13,000 today, a 13-fold increase across a period when general prices roughly doubled. Even when employers absorb a portion of that cost, it shows up in the form of stagnant wage growth, because compensation packages are a total number, and every dollar spent on benefits is a dollar not spent on salary. The healthcare inflation that most workers think of as their employer's problem is, in a very real mathematical sense, coming out of their compensation, whether they see it itemized or not. Education completes the triad, and this one is particularly important for understanding the financial position of people currently in their late 20s through mid-40s, the demographic most likely to be in that $100,000 income range, and most likely to be simultaneously carrying the weight of student debt accumulated when tuition was already rising but hadn't yet reached its current altitude. The average annual tuition at a 4-year public university rose from approximately $3,500 in 1990 to over $11,000 by 2024, more than triple in real terms, and at private institutions the numbers are dramatically more severe. What this means in practice is that a significant portion of today's professional workforce entered their earning years already carrying a debt obligation that functions as a negative wealth position, one that reduces their effective net worth and their capacity to save and invest during precisely the years when the mathematics of compounding would reward early contributions most generously. Now hold all 3 of those forces in mind simultaneously. Housing 3 times more expensive relative to income, healthcare 13 times more expensive per person, education triple the real cost, and ask yourself what income level would today provide the financial breathing room that $100,000 provided in the late 1990s. This is not a rhetorical question. It has a mathematical answer, and the answer depends heavily on geography and household structure. But in most major metropolitan areas with median or above median housing costs, independent researchers and economists studying real wage adequacy tend to arrive at figures between $150,000 and $250,000 for a household to achieve what would previously have been considered comfortable middle-class stability, with meaningful savings, moderate housing costs relative to income, and reasonable insulation from financial emergency. That is a number that still sounds wealthy to most people, and that perception, the gap between what the number sounds like socially and what it actually represents economically, is itself one of the most important psychological phenomena at work in modern financial life. We are using an outdated map. We are celebrating a threshold that has been quietly moved, judging our financial progress against a benchmark that the underlying economics outgrew decades ago, and making decisions about careers, about cities, about spending and saving, based on a mythology of what 6 figures means that no longer aligns with what 6 figures does. There is a name for the cognitive error at the heart of this. Economists call it money illusion, the systematic human tendency to think in terms of nominal values rather than real purchasing power. It is not a flaw of intelligence. It is a feature of how human cognition handles numbers, and it affects everyone, from entry-level workers to senior executives. When a salary number rises, the brain registers progress. When prices rise just as fast or faster, the brain does not automatically register the offset. The result is a population of workers who feel, based on their income number, that they should be financially comfortable, and who experience genuine confusion and often misplace self-blame when that comfort fails to materialize. Understanding this clearly does not make the structural forces go away. It does not lower housing prices or reduce healthcare premiums or reverse the cost trajectory of higher education. But it does something that matters enormously in practical terms. It recalibrates the target. It shifts the decision-making frame from, have I earned enough to stop worrying, to what does enough actually look like in the real economic environment I'm navigating. And that shift, from the social mythology of a number to the mathematical reality of purchasing power, is the foundation of every genuinely effective financial strategy in the current environment. Because the people who are building real wealth right now are not necessarily the people earning the most. They are the people who understand most clearly the gap between what a number sounds like and what it actually does, and who make their decisions accordingly. The threshold has moved. The question now is whether your financial thinking has moved with it.